FPF is a nonprofit organization that works globally and serves as a catalyst for privacy leadership and scholarship, advancing principled data practices in support of emerging technologies. We are delighted to be able to host this conversation on Safer Internet Day. Safer Internet Day aims to create a safer and better internet where everyone is empowered to use technology responsibly, respectfully, critically, and creatively. Alongside today's conversation, FPF is launching our new infographic showing the many ways that encryption protects kids and teens and keeps them safe. Today's young people have lived their entire lives in the age of the commercial internet, social media, electronic health records, and a growing range of internet-connected devices, from insulin pumps to vehicles. In all of this, encryption is still the first best protection to ensure that communications, transactions, personal data, and digital devices are safe and secure. Encryption protects the digital lives of young people and keeps them safe in the physical world as well, whether it's preventing malicious actors from gaining control of kids' internet-connected health tools and teens' messaging accounts, or authenticating identities to keep unwanted people out of protected spaces like schools. As we kick off this event, it is first of all my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Commissioner Patricia Cossiem, the Information and Privacy Commissioner of Ontario, since she started in that role in 2020. Commissioner Cossiem previously served as counsel in Osler's Privacy and Data Management Group, where she provided strategic advice to clients on matters of privacy, data governance, and access law. And for more than a decade, she served as Senior General Counsel and Director General at the Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada in Ottawa. The Commission will be able to take questions, maybe a question or two, after her remarks. So if you would like to ask something, we please do ask that you use the Q&A feature located at the bottom of your Zoom screen, so we can keep the chat robust for those who are in attendance. And with that, it is my pleasure to turn this figurative microphone over to Commissioner Cossiem.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much, Amy, and thank you, Jules Polonetsky and the Future Privacy Forum for organizing this important discussion and inviting me to be a part of it. It's a real honor to join you on Safer Internet Day to talk about the digital privacy and security of young people, one of the most important responsibilities we have as caretakers of the next generation. Today's young people have lived their entire lives in the age of the internet, social media, electronic records, and internet-connected devices. And nowhere is this made clearer than in the brilliant infographic just issued by FPF this morning. So as Amy said, almost every aspect of young people's lives is shaped by digital interactions, whether they're learning in virtual classrooms, socializing on platforms, playing video games, or accessing critical services. Encryption is one of the best ways to ensure that their personal communications, transactions, and devices stay safe and secure. This webinar brings together leading experts to explore how encryption protects young people, from safeguarding private conversations to preventing malicious actors from accessing online devices. Encryption plays a fundamental role in protecting personal data and ensuring young people can navigate the digital world safely and with confidence. In carrying out its statutory mandate, my office is guided by 4 strategic priorities that address some of the key challenges to Ontarians' privacy and access rights in a data-driven world. These strategic priorities assist us in directing our energies and allocating our resources in focused areas where we're likely to have the most significant and positive impact. One of these strategic priorities is children and youth in a digital world. Our goal in this priority area is to champion the access and privacy rights of Ontario's children and youth by promoting their digital literacy and digital rights, while holding institutions accountable for protecting the children and youth they serve. So as you can see, our goal has both an empowerment and a protection dimension to it. On the one hand, we want to equip our youth with the information and tools they need to learn, grow, and develop in the digital world with a sense of autonomy, dignity, and wonderment. On the other hand, as adults, we should not be downloading onto them the responsibilities we have to keep them safe and protect them from online harms. One of the most significant developments in Ontario recently is the adoption of Bill 194, the Strengthening Cybersecurity and Building Trust in the Public Sector Act. This new law addresses critical areas such as cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, and the handling of young people's digital information by public sector organizations, including school boards and children's aid societies. As the bill was going through the legislative process, the IPC supported the bill's objectives, but we identified key gaps and missed opportunities. Among other things, we recommended that the law should deem personal information of children to be sensitive, attracting a higher level of protection. We recommended that the law should codify explicit safeguards to protect the digital information of minors, and that protections should not be left to future and uncertain regulations. We also stressed the need for clear and independent oversight to ensure compliance and enforcement of children's privacy rights under the law. Our recommendations unfortunately did not come to pass, but our strong advocacy work continues to inform eventual regulations governing digital technologies aimed at children and youth and help ensure robust protections for young people. Recently, as many of you have probably heard, a significant data breach occurred at PowerSchool, an education technology software company that provides services to school boards and schools. This incident has potentially compromised the personal information of millions of students and staff in school boards across Canada, the US, and globally. We are currently collaborating with our Canadian federal, provincial, and territorial counterparts to address this issue in a coordinated way. So my office is actively investigating the breach from the perspective of the Ontario Provincial Ministry of Education and the more than 20 Ontario school boards affected, while the federal commissioner, who has jurisdiction over private sector organizations, is looking into the company itself. From a regulator's perspective, this breach highlights the critical importance of enforcement collaboration among different jurisdictions on issues that affect Canadians nationwide. Under Bill 194, the Ontario Legislature recognized this importance and has vested me and my office with authority to share information with our FPT and other counterparts to more effectively address large-scale incidents that cross jurisdictional lines. As the fallout of the PowerSchool breach reminds us so starkly, students place a great deal of trust in their schools. And that trust must be met with a commitment to protecting their privacy. Last year, my office launched the Digital Privacy Charter for Ontario Schools, a framework of commitments designed to help schools and school boards safeguard student privacy, including through service providers, while also empowering students and encouraging responsible digital citizenship. This initiative was very much inspired by the Future of Privacy Forum's student pledge, which encouraged service providers to safeguard student data. By adopting the Digital Charter, Ontario schools and school boards can demonstrate true leadership by building a privacy-respecting educational environment that their students, parents, and communities can trust. Another milestone in our efforts to empower and protect young people's privacy rights is the integration of digital literacy into Ontario's newly revised education curriculum for grades 1 through 9. The updated curriculum, which features privacy education and digital citizenship, aligns with our privacy pursuit lesson plans, which we developed in 2023, as well as the Global Privacy Assembly's International Personal Data Competency Framework for students. Our partnership with Media Smarts, Canada's Centre for Media Literacy, has taken this work even further. Their soon-to-be-released digital textbooks incorporate IPC's Privacy Pursuit lesson plans, providing students with practical guidance on privacy and online safety. This collaboration ensures young people develop the critical privacy skills they need as part of their formal education. But beyond laws, policies, and programs, empowering young people themselves to become privacy leaders and advocates in their own right is just as essential. Young people aren't just passive participants in the digital world, they are shaping it. That's why the IPC created a Youth Advisory Council a couple of years ago to give young people a voice, to express their views and provide us with relevant advice from their perspective on how we can better advance our strategic goal related to children and youth in a digital world. So, working closely with members of our Youth Council, we developed a Youth Ambassador Toolkit, an initiative that provides young people with tools and resources to become privacy champions in their schools and communities. The toolkit includes education materials, PowerPoint presentations, social media posts, presentation tips, and FAQs to equip our young people with the information they need to lead important conversations about digital literacy and privacy among their peers. At our annual federal, provincial, and territorial meeting that our office had the pleasure of hosting in Toronto last October, we invited several members of our Youth Council to speak directly with Canada's Information and Privacy Commissioners about their experiences in the digital world. My colleagues and I were truly inspired by what they had to say. They strongly and quite directly reinforce the urgent need for strong policies, legislation, and education programs to not only protect young people in an increasingly digital world, but empower them with the knowledge and skills they need to exercise their own privacy rights. Their passion certainly strengthened our resolve to ensure that children's privacy remains at the forefront of our advocacy work. And the many conversations I've had with various guests on our Info Matters podcast, including with teens, young adults, and educators, further confirm the need to carry on with these efforts. So looking ahead in March, I plan to participate in a UNICEF data governance workshop. This event will focus on exploring rights-based, multi-stakeholder models for governing data processing by educational technologies, or EdTech. This global workshop brings together data protection authorities, ministries of education, schools, private sector, civil society, and children to discuss existing data governance practices across different regions and sectors. By engaging in this workshop, we aim to contribute to the global discourse on data governance and collaborate with international partners to create a safer digital environment for children worldwide. So before closing, I want to circle back to the critical role that encryption plays in keeping our young people safe. Strong encryption enables young people to engage with technology safely without fear of surveillance, predatory practices, ID theft, or data breaches. As we explore privacy and security solutions for the next generation, we must ensure that encryption remains a cornerstone of digital safety. So as we mark Safer Internet Day, I want to congratulate the Future of Privacy Forum for organizing today's event as an important step in that direction. With the insights from the upcoming panel of experts, we can continue to explore how encryption protects young people in their daily lives, online and beyond. Whether through legislation, education, or technological safeguards like encryption, we must continue working together on all of these different facets. So the IPC and I personally remain dedicated to this mission, and we look forward to continuing our work alongside youth, educators, policymakers, and privacy advocates like you. So on that, I want to thank you again for inviting me, and I look forward to today's discussions. And if there's time, I'd be pleased to take questions.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. I see some digital applause is already coming in. That is well deserved. We greatly appreciate your remarks. I don't see a question in the Q&A, but I did get something on the back end, if you wouldn't mind. You mentioned the work that you've done both to educate teens as well as to educate them to become educators, and also talked about direct conversations that you've had with them in your podcast. FPF co-hosted a few events last year in Australia talking about the intersection of safety, privacy, security for kids. And one of the outcomes of those conversations was a need to talk to more young people. So I was wondering if you could share maybe one or two of the more interesting things you've learned from those conversations that people, policymakers who are not connecting directly with the impacted population might not be aware of.
Well, first of all, I'm so pleased that we did this a couple of years ago and created this youth advisory council. And there's no doubt that they make us better as regulators by informing us of their perspective and keeping us on the ground and relevant to this younger demographic. And one of the things that they continually remind us about and really literally bust the myth is that privacy, that kids don't care about privacy. And I think that, certainly in your work through FPF and many privacy advocates who study this area of children and teens' privacy know that that can't be further from the truth. They very much do care about privacy. They're very savvy about their privacy and their choices, uh, their choices online, their settings, but they need to be informed, and they are very hungry for information and education, and they're especially concerned about commercial third-party uses of their personal information online, and they want to know and learn more about it and understand how to protect themselves. One of the great contributions that Media Smarts has made to Canadian and global literacy and literature, in this area is the tremendous research they've done, both quantitative and qualitative, with young people in understanding privacy from their perspectives. And the youth that we meet on our council through our conversations certainly confirm their research findings. So I would just say that is probably key among many other things, but I think they have tremendous energy, passion, drive, smarts, and they are hungry for, as I said, information, education, tools in order to be able to better protect themselves. That being said, I think they also realize that we can't as adults dump all the responsibility onto them, that they need protections as well, of the educators, of policymakers, of regulators. They need to be protected, and that's why encryption, for instance, among other forms of protection, that one being a technological one, but there are other forms of regulatory protections that need to be in place to meet them halfway. And that's what we try to do.
Thank you so much. Thank you for coming today, for sharing your thoughts and your experiences, your expertise with all of us. It's greatly appreciated, well-deserved applause. And we will, at this point, I think, turn to the remainder of our conversation. I will say before I go on, I do want to spend just a second and thank all of those who worked on today's event behind the scenes. FPF's excellent events and communication professionals, particularly Elizabeth Gorey, Megan McCollum, did amazing work in support of this event. I also want to thank my colleague, Jameson Spivak, who helped organize this event and who works on a range of issues at FPF, including AI, biometrics, and immersive technologies. And now I get to turn this event over to John Verdi for the remainder. John is
Thank you.
FPF's Senior Vice President for Policy, supervising FPF's work on a broad range of issues, including those we are discussing here today. John has also specifically spearheaded FPF's work on encryption over the past several years, including overseeing the work on FPF's first ever encryption infographic that was published in 2020. Please join me in welcoming John and our panel of discussants.
Thank you so much, Amy. Really appreciate it. Thanks to all for organizing the event. Thank you to the commissioner for those wise remarks and getting us started. We have a fantastic panel of experts here today to talk about how encryption works, what the emerging issues are as as that technology intersects with online services and a range of technologies that young people avail themselves of. Before we begin with introductions of the experts, I want to flag that we were planning to have recorded opening remarks from Peter Leonard all the way from Australia, where it's now well past 2 o'clock in the morning. And due to a technical glitch on FPF's end, I don't actually have access to the recording, but Mr. Leonard was kind enough to provide us with written remarks. I want to make those available to you in the chat. And if anybody's watching this back in the future on YouTube or on another platform, those will be linked there as well. So Peter is the principal and director at Data Strategies. As I said, he's located in Australia, where it is well past 2 o'clock in the morning at this stage. We hope you'll take the opportunity after the event to read Peter's comments, where he provides a detailed update on the state of conversations around online safety, privacy, and encryption in Australia. Peter's comments note a recent shift in perception around the balance between privacy, information security, and online safety, other very important issues that has led to discussions about what proactive measures, including the implementation of new technologies, are necessary to impose upon different categories of online services. There was a recent report that Peter highlights that reviewed Australia's Online Safety Act of 2021. And Peter shares that encryption was classified as a quote unquote wicked problem, a really thorny issue, a difficult problem, a tough problem. And that document proposes a new overarching duty of care on online service providers. These are all quite complex issues, and Peter speaks to them better than I ever could. So I would refer you to his written remarks and just flag that I learned a ton. Please use the link that is available now in the chat and also on FPF's website to read those full remarks. So now let's turn to the experts who are here live. And we have a great group representing a number of different organizations and different perspectives. I am very pleased to welcome Mallory and Michael and Matt and Heather and Jonathan. And I thought what I might do is first ask you folks to turn on your cameras if you can. And then we might go ahead and do some initial introductions. If you could just share who you are and what you do and where you do it when I call on you, I think that would be a great quick round of introductions. And then I have some questions teed up so we can dive right into these important issues. So first up, Matt, how are you? Welcome. Please share a little bit about who you are, what you do, and where you do it.
Hi, John. My name is Matt Mitchell. My pronouns are he, they, and I'm currently the CEO of Safety Sync Group, which is a risk mitigation company. But previously, I worked at the Ford Foundation, looking out for the grantees of the Ford Foundation for 5 years. Encryption played a huge role in making sure that they were private. And before that, I was the founder of Crypto Harlem, which is a nonprofit organization that protects marginalized people globally, especially African Americans in the United States.
Welcome, Matt. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Next up is Michael. Michael,
Hello,
welcome.
everyone. Thank you for allowing me to participate in this session. I'm based in Toronto. Currently, I'm a sole practitioner, both in law, practicing mainly in the area of emerging technologies, privacy, AI, which everybody seems to be doing these days. But I've had a long and varied career, everything from big law to running my own consulting companies actually, I know Patricia from a past life when I used to be involved in electronic health with the Ontario government. And even I had a stint as one of the authors of PIPEDA, the Canadian Federal Privacy Legislation. And quite surprisingly for this session, I did have a stint for 2 years involved in encryption and public key infrastructure policy for the federal Canadian government.
Nice. Thank you, Michael. Really appreciate you being here with us today. Next up, Mallory.
Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for the invitation. I'm Mallory Nodal. I'm the executive director of the Social Web Foundation, and I also study cryptography at New York University. In the past, I've led or helped to lead the Global Encryption Coalition, which is a civil society and tech partnership. I'm still a member. And I also chair a research group at the Internet Research Task Force on Human Rights and Internet Protocols.
Thank you so much, Mallory. Really appreciate you joining us. Next up, Heather.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Heather Burns, and I work on a range of issues at the intersection of tech policy and digital and human rights here in the UK. And I'm very grateful to the FPF for inviting me on today at short notice to try to make some sense out of some breaking, fairly seismic news on encryption coming out of the UK, which could impact young people everywhere.
Thanks, Heather. Really appreciate you being here and very timely. Very much appreciate it. Jonathan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jonathan Lee. I'm the head of policy for WhatsApp and messaging at Meta. And in that role, I look after policy issues for all of our private messaging services at Meta, which of course includes WhatsApp, Messenger, as well as the messaging aspect of Instagram. And delighted to be here and really glad that we're talking about this important topic today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Really appreciate you being here. Before we get started, I would love to share with folks a very, I think, well done resource that Amy and the team put together that is now on the screen share. It's available on the FPF website. We're going to have a link in the chat. This is an infographic that provides additional detail on how strong encryption protects young people, teens and kids who increasingly are using online services to do everything from manage their health to engage with their classes, in some circumstances to work in the workforce and to avail themselves of government services. The whole range of activities that young people, teens and kids, data intersects with the online world. We've produced this infographic to demonstrate the ways that strong encryption protects that data when it's at rest, when it's in transit, the ways that strong encryption can help preserve the integrity of that data and how it can authenticate access to information or to physical facilities in a way that helps keep everybody safer, particularly young folks. The infographic actually has a second page, which demonstrates what the risks are to young people when strong encryption is undermined. And there's a few ways that strong encryption can be undermined, and we'll talk a little bit about this on the panel. One of the ways is simple technical errors, right? Sometimes the implementation of a particular encryption approach can have technical errors or bugs in it. And technologists and online services often rush to fix those errors and those bugs. But there's other ways strong encryption can be undermined as well. And one of the ways we're seeing now and we've seen in previous years is efforts by governments, other organizations to provide what's called exceptional access to some organizations or individuals, sometimes for quite meritorious reasons. But that exceptional access ends up weakening, undermining, and ultimately frustrating all of the protections that strong encryption supports by default. So thank you so much for letting me share this FPF infographic. I learned a lot when Amy and the team shared it with me. I hope that policymakers and folks in civil society and academia and industry learn a lot as well. I'll go ahead and stop the screen share, and I'll refer folks to the FPF website for a high resolution version of that infographic and for more information. For our panelists, I'm going to toss the first question to Matt, and then I'll turn to Michael. Just to level set for the folks who are attending the webinar today, could you briefly explain what encryption is, how it can provide protection, particularly with regard to kids and teens and the different communities that you've worked with?
Yeah, of course. In computer science and in computers, we talk about public keys and private keys and cryptography. But at the end of the day, encryption's what's known as a one-way or trapdoor function. And just as if you were walking across a trapdoor and you fell down, that'd be pretty easy to do, right? It's pretty easy to slide down, a couple of meters or feet, and then, let's say land on a soft substance. Well, at the end of the day, you're looking up and it's really hard, if not impossible, to climb up. And that's what encryption is. It allows us to simply use math, right? To create a way that it's easy to do one way, like lock things and secure things, but next to impossible because it's computationally expensive. And we'll get into quantum and other things later, to get up and even attempt to come up from that. And so what does that mean in reality? And how does that protect communities, especially young people? We started out in a world where we're all just hanging out together around a fire trying to survive, right? All civilizations were just groups of human beings, we're social animals trying to make it. We had a lot of community, but we didn't have privacy. Everyone slept and walked around in the same space. And encryption allows us to build a home for ourselves. And even though my hut and your hut might look exactly the same, it gives me the ability to have a door and choose who I let in, who I welcome in to my home, give them a tour and let them see how I live. And when we wake up every day and we pick up our phones and we pick up our computers, we're using encryption tens, if not hundreds of times. And it is the thing that allows you to, if you're shopping, type in a credit card and know that no one else can see that. If you're talking to a loved one or a community member, a parent, educator, or guardian, it lets you know that the communication between you and that person are, sacrament and sound. Right? When I talk to communities, many of whom are targeted because of their identities or the color of their passports, their documents or lack thereof, I often talk to them about encryption being someone giving you keys to a house, a beautiful mansion in the best part of town or wherever. But the house, when you get there, you realize it's made out of glass. Not many people would accept that gift, right? We are people who, when we walk out of the shower, even if alone, we'll grab a towel. If we, rent or purchase a new home, we're going to get, curtains for our windows. One of the first things we do. There's something about humanity that's tied to this agency of control of who we let in and who we don't. And we've always done that. Encryption is just the modern way to allow us to have that. So I say that encryption is not secrecy, it is privacy. And privacy is tied to who we are as human beings. All human beings, no matter your height, no matter how young you are, deserve privacy. And in today's world, we need encryption in our modern world to allow folks to have that same privacy.
Thank you, Matt. Really appreciate that. I will turn to Mallory. Mallory, there is a common framing that some privacy enhancing tools like end-to-end encryption are fundamentally in tension with national security and public safety objectives, right? For example, some lawmakers argue that if law enforcement is not able to access certain private communications, it's harder for them to protect against threats. Threats like terrorism and violent crime and child exploitation, no doubt really terrible things that criminals engage in. Do you push back on this framing? Do you accept this framing? How does this, in your mind, relate to protecting young people specifically when it comes to encrypted services?
Yes, so thanks so much for that question, because I've been answering it now for the majority of my career. I'm very well prepared. Because first, we had to hear about this balance in the context of, terrorism. And it was all of us needing to sort of balance our right to privacy with some other agencies or institutions that were going to help us stay safe. And the reframe that worked then is the same reframe that works now. If you put the people who are being protected at the center of your concern, then encryption is the solution. Encryption is part of what keeps us all safe. And I think your infographic makes this point very, very clearly. So I'm not going to belabor it. Like these are the ways in which encryption can help young people and teens, right? Recognizing also that young people is a really, really broad category. And I think one of the the points I've made in the writing I've done about children specifically on this point is that, you have to imagine that there are so many different ways to be a young person, and that you cannot flatten that into some entity that will always and forever need protecting by exactly the same people. So, parents can be adversaries for children. This was a really major point in Eastern Europe around the time that Apple was thinking about rolling out more protective measures in iMessage. The state can have a relationship with children that can be adversarial, right? So you have to imagine there's a lot of different reasons why, at the end of the day, encryption is actually good for everyone, in particular, the most marginalized. I think youth fits into that category. I think a couple other points that have been particularly persuasive that I and others have made in the past is also the solution space has been really blown up by AI. Actually, I was able to scan very quickly Leonard's post, Peter Leonard's post. He talks about why public opinion in Australia is changing, and it's because there's a perception that AI capabilities can make these measures more effective to keep kids safe online despite encryption. And I think we have to be very realistic that technology today is incredibly troubled, right? Like it isn't as good as it sounds. And of course, it'll get better. But we also have to consider that these problems, these very complex social problems, are not going to have neat and easy technical solutions. So I feel like AI doesn't really help the debate. It complicates it a lot more, because public debate now has to worry about, what are public and private and cryptography, and they have to worry about, like, is AI any good? And this can be really confusing, and it can be essentially a sort of wedge for law enforcement to again kind of come in and talk about how the sort of solution very much relies on them being able to exercise judgment and have more access. I will say, though, just to harken back to the keynote speaker, if you talk to kids, and some nonprofit organizations have done, they will tell you, especially teens, right? They know a lot about how to keep themselves safe online. Like, they're learning all the time. They're technically proficient. And what they want is, in social media apps, in encrypted apps, they want more control over the conversations they're having, and the ability to block and report and keyword filter. And until very recently, they didn't have those controls. So we'd like to encourage platforms to think so much about children's safety online that they actually give more agency to kids, not less, which is what backdooring encryption or parental controls and so on actually do. And so I'll just kind of wrap up, like, really what I've learned, the sort of three main issues is, one is that when you reframe this to center children, you have to reckon with the fact that there's really no silver bullet solution to these very, very serious problems. And you have to let tech be only part of the solution. And I think you have to also accept that encryption is one of those parts. And so you have to work around that as a sort of baseline from which you work up from. Then I think as well, we have to consider encryption as a check on law enforcement, like a very important check on law enforcement. And this includes exploitation of children and complex relationships that youth have to families and the state. And then, yes, I think that this is, the main thing, that the technical mechanisms can also empower kids, and that can be a good thing if it's done with guidance and in partnership with education and trusted context. So that's how I sort of reframe this debate for kids and encryption.
Mallory, thank you so much. Really appreciate that. I appreciate you broadly defining youth in your remarks. I hope that includes the young at heart, which would include, I think, a lot of people on this call and perhaps some who are tuning into the webinar. So I'll just put a pin in that and say, if you are young at heart, welcome to the Youth and Encryption debate. The other thing you mentioned is encryption as a check on bad actors, and I think that makes a ton of sense. FPF has been working on this issue for a while. One of our previous resources, our previous infographic, talked about the ways in which government officials benefit from strong encryption, whether it's military communications, law enforcement communications, elected officials who need secure communications in order to run their electoral campaigns and keep their information private and protect their loved ones and families and friends from folks who seek to stalk or harass them, right? So I think that the benefits are really broad-based, and the risks, though law enforcement certainly makes a case about the risks here, the risks tend to be more specific. They tend to center around terrorism and child exploitation and things like that, whereas the benefits tend to be slightly more broad-based. So Michael, let me ask you this. How, in your view, are policymakers thinking about encryption? What impact does this have on the ability of digital service providers to ensure that their products are safe and secure? And where do you see it from your perspective, from where you sit?
Okay, thank you. First of all, my apologies. I seem to have had a technical issue. I don't know if some tariff kicked in somewhere, but we're back. I think, to answer your question, in a lot of ways, when you think about policymakers as a particular set of stakeholders in this whole encryption discussion, I think it's in a state of flux. Certainly we have the news out of the UK vis-a-vis Apple, which contrasts with advice coming out of American national security authorities, in December, promoting the use of end-to-end encryption. So I think, and that was then. Now we have a new US administration, not quite sure what their policy will be on this front. So I think the safe answer to say here is that we're somewhat in a state of flux. Whether the UK request or order, as the media reports have indicated, makes it, has a knock-on effect. I think time will tell. But, from the whole discussion about encryption, it's a very complex issue, given all the stakeholders. Certainly industry is pro-encryption, privacy community is pro-encryption. One argues with one eye on China, the national security community is pro-encryption. And it only seems that law enforcement is anti-encryption because, they want it for prosecution purposes. And I'm not sure that that's necessarily the best answer to have. Better to be preventative than to, have an easier time getting evidence after the fact.
Thank you, Michael. That's super helpful framing. Perhaps now would be a good time to chat a little bit about a specific example of how policymakers are thinking about this. So Heather, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it, with the view from the UK. If folks have not been following this issue over the past 4 or so days, the UK government recently made front page news for allegedly ordering Apple to re-engineer they're encrypted iCloud backups. These are backups of photos and messages and a whole lot of other data that individuals upload to iCloud and encrypt in order to keep them secure. And later, use the backups when they switch devices or they have, a data loss or something like that. This would require Apple to undermine iCloud security for everybody with an iCloud account, right? Certainly individuals in the UK, perhaps worldwide, depending on the details of the order. Could you help us better understand the UK Investigatory Powers Act, which is the law under which this order was said to be issued, and the impacts that you see this having on security and safety for teens and kids?
Certainly, John. And as Michael said, it is actually a very good example of how these sort of thorny issues play out in the policy sphere. So for the people in the chat who, unlike us, haven't been up to our eyeballs in these issues, on Friday lunchtime here in the UK, morning in the US, the Washington Post dropped an absolute bombshell that the Home Office, which is the Interior Security Ministry here in the UK, had issued a technical capability notice to Apple requesting that they essentially break the end-to-end encryption on iCloud as enabled by advanced data protection for all Apple users. This was in the Washington Post. As for why it was in the Washington Post, we'll get to that in a minute. So the Investigatory Powers Act is a 2016 regulation which deals with how law enforcement security services access electronically kept data. And there is a system of judicial authorization as well as a technical panel and some oversight, which oversees this whole regime, but it is still extremely secretive and opaque. Now, the request was a TCN, technical capability notice, to break open the end-to-end encryption. That's just the first step. They didn't say what they wanted to do with it. They wanted it open. The next step would require separate judicial authorization, and that would either be a targeted interception warrant, as in they're looking for a specific person, specific issue, specific account, or a bulk interception warrant, which is collecting everything. Regardless of what that was, I'm not going to speculate because I don't know. The Home Office TCN would be extraterritorial because, as every one of the experts on this panel will tell you, you cannot selectively break end-to-end encryption for iPhones in the UK. You have to break it for the whole system everywhere in the world. Now, the reason that you read about this, as we did in the Washington Post, was because the TCN system under the Investigatory Powers Act is completely secret. A lot of people were saying to me, can I see a copy of the notice? Where is it? Well, I couldn't tell you. I have never seen a notice. To even disclose the existence of a notice is a crime. So Apple would not be able to disclose that they had received a notice. They would not even be able to inform other people within Apple that they had received a notice. And the Home Office can either deny nor confirm the existence of the thing. So somebody, I'm not going to speculate, either in Apple or the Home Office had to leak this to an American newspaper. And that, we are talking about privacy, but that is a level of state secrecy that is completely incompatible with the way we should be doing things. Now, assuming that this TCN did go through and Apple had been strong-armed to remove end-to-end encryption on iCloud, Apple's choices would either be to, I don't know, they could threaten to pull out of the UK, I can't say they would, or switch off ADP, which would be switching it off for everyone. But even if they didn't and that TCN went through, you can guarantee that every law enforcement agency of every authoritarian nation in the world would be petitioning the UK through the law enforcement cooperation system to access the encrypted data of absolutely anyone, anywhere in the world. Now, a lot of people asked me, because they were very confused about this, is this the Online Safety Act, which is the UK's child protection regulation? John talked about the Australian Online Safety Act. It's a carbon copy of the UK. Well, the Online Safety Act also has a means for technical interception. And that would be not breaking encryption per se, but compelling service providers to either use accredited technology or develop or source the technology themselves to detect either CSAM or terrorist content. Now that system, it's currently open for consultation because Ofcom has had to sheepishly admit that, in Mallory's phrase, they've legislated for magical thinking. They have mandated the uses of technology which either do not exist or in prototypes are basically mass surveillance incompatible with a healthy regard for human rights. But the Ofcom system is through a regulator. There is no judicial authorization or review. So we are in this remarkable space in the UK where we have two separate pieces of legislation which mandate the breaking of secure encryption and or the scanning of any and all data indiscriminately on the assumption that there is something bad there. And this doesn't just affect young people, it impacts everyone. Because to scan all these things to protect the young people, you have to scan for everyone. And as Pat said in her opening remarks, we need secure encryption to help support young people to explore the world safely. And assuming that Apple TCN had gone through and we never heard about it because nobody had leaked it to the Washington Post, neither parents who are supporting their children to develop healthy online skills, nor the educators who are looking out for them, nor even the service providers would have any idea that the communications and the data flows they thought were protected or encryption were not.
Thank you for that comprehensive view. Certainly fast-moving events in the UK and elsewhere. Jonathan, you folks build messaging products, lots of other sorts of online services. How does your organization approach the integration of encryption into different products or services? And how do you think about this with respect to young people?
Terrific. Well, thank you again for hosting this panel. And I just want to emphasize at the outset, and plus one, what many of the panelists have said about the importance of end-to-end encryption and how important it is for us at Meta to incorporate end-to-end encryption and the protections it provides, including to young people into our messaging services. And end-to-end encryption has increasingly become the standard for online communications. But it is, for many of the reasons that the panelists have said, not something we can take for granted. We have to stay on guard against laws and government actions that may undermine end-to-end encryption, whether directly through things like mandated backdoors or client-side scanning, like Heather just mentioned, and also laws that may do so indirectly, for instance, by creating obligations to detect or remove certain types of content that is technically impossible to do while maintaining end-to-end encryption. And as I said, we believe very strongly in end-to-end encryption at Meta and its importance for protecting the privacy, safety, and security of all of our users of our messaging services, including young people. We have for many years offered end-to-end encryption by default. That is for all personal messages on WhatsApp. That's been the case since 2016. And we're very proud to be one of the first, if not the first, large-scale messaging services to offer default end-to-end encryption at scale. And for the past number of years, we've been working to bring default end-to-end encryption to our other private messaging apps, to the point now where the vast majority of messages on Messenger are also default end-to-end encrypted. So we do think of end-to-end encryption as an extremely important baseline protection for young people on our messaging services for many of the reasons outlined in the infographic that you've shared today, and for many of the reasons that my fellow panelists have stated. And building on that foundation of end-to-end encryption, we have a number of other approaches to helping young people stay safe online on our services. And we use a framework that we call prevent, control, and respond, just for shorthand. So preventing is about preventing harm from happening in the first place, wherever we can. Control, as some others have mentioned today, is about giving young people and parents the tools to control their online experiences. And responding is about responding to violations of our policies based on the information that's available to us. And we go about this in different ways based on the different nature of our different messaging services, because not all of our services, even within Meta, are the same. That's certainly true for other companies that may offer slightly different services. So for all of our services that are end-to-end encrypted, we do offer user reporting, which we think is a baseline essential measure to help people report when they're seeing or encountering harmful content, as well as to block other users from whom they don't want to be reached out to. In the context of WhatsApp, which is a standalone messaging app, so not connected to the social graph or to other parts of our social media platforms at Meta, we offer some additional protections. For instance, based on how WhatsApp is designed, accounts aren't discoverable. You have to have someone's phone number in order to reach out to them. You can't just find it somewhere and message them out of the blue. And we also provide controls about who can add people to groups. For instance, if you can set a control within WhatsApp to say nobody outside of my contacts can add me to groups without my permission. This is a very important control, and it's one that young people can utilize and parents can utilize with the young people in their lives to ensure they have these sorts of controls turned on. Messenger is a bit different. It's a combination of a standalone messaging app, but it's also connected to the social graph, by which I mean Facebook, the social media service. And so we have some additional techniques that we can provide on top of end-to-end encryption to help young people control their experience and stay safe online. For instance, we have restrictions on the extent to which unconnected adults can message minors, by which I mean adults who aren't connected to the minor through their Facebook social graph aren't able to message a minor. And then in Instagram, which is the messaging service that is connected to Instagram, but it's not a standalone messaging service, where we have not yet rolled out end-to-end encryption. Last year, we rolled out a suite of tools, which we call teen accounts. And we're looking at ways we might be able to bring some of these protections to other apps where appropriate. So all of these are ways that we think about how to build on the core protection of end-to-end encryption in our different messaging apps. But the foundation of that is the belief that end-to-end encryption is an essential tool to help people stay safe online, and that very much includes young people. So thank you again.
Awesome. Thank you, Jonathan. Thanks so much for being here, and thanks for sharing that perspective. Matt, you mentioned quantum right off the top, and I'll sort of pose a question to you and then more broadly to the group. What are some of the emerging trends that you're seeing? Could be quantum, could be something else, that might impact how encryption works, how it's being implemented these days, and what that might mean for teens and kids who use these sorts of technologies. So I'll toss to Matt first, and then open it up to the group.
Yeah, sure. And what a great conversation it's been so far. Well, quantum computing is, well, we know that encryption is based on math, and we know that the thing that makes it hard to decrypt something is that it would require an extreme long period of time for us to even have a hope of decrypting, something. It could be generations of human life before you could even have a hope of decrypting something. And that's because the math is pretty hard, right? But as we know, there's levels to math. You might use an abacus to do 2 + 2, or you might do advanced cryptography on the other side. Well, as computer chips get smaller and more powerful, that math becomes easier to do, and that length of time that is impossible becomes shorter and shorter, and it goes from human generations to possibly years or months. And so quantum computing is, the thing of it is just very large, very powerful, very hot, size of a room, size of a rocket type of computing functionality. But, the computers that we use today that we carry around in our pockets, originally, not even a tenth of that power would have filled a building, generations ago. So we do have to keep an eye out for trends and changes in technology as they impact everything to do with math and therefore encryption. And that's the idea here is that a risk? And do the standards of encryption that we use now, maybe they fall down? But that doesn't mean that there'll be no encryption. What we need is to always be running with the ball. And just as the same computers could be used to decrypt and do cryptology and break and shatter ciphers, we can come up with new algorithms that were previously impossible or too difficult to run on a normal machine, a normal phone, a normal software to keep up with the trend. And that's the challenge. I'm not going to, steal more time, but one thing that's quite interesting to me is with the advent of AI, um, you can have not just a brute forcing attempt to break encryption, but a pretty sophisticated logical attempt. I can say, hey, artificial intelligence, I want you to try to come up with an encryption algorithm that does this, or that using these particular principles. And I want you to find all the flaws and just work on the flaws. And it's like, okay, I'll get right on that for you. And it's like, and I want you to multiply yourself by 1,000,000. So there's 1,000,000 versions of you trying to solve this. Well, that's what we can actually do today. And that's something that is exciting to look at because it works on both sides of the coin.
No, very fair. It does seem like the history of cryptography, in some ways, you mentioned is math and implementation of one-way functions and things like that, but it's also attacker defender, right? It's how do these advances impact how we implement encryption? How do they impact how individuals try to break encryption and encryption implementation? Sometimes it's not the algorithm, it's the actual implementation. Others emerging trends that you are seeing, whether it's in the tech or whether it's in the policy.
I'd be happy to jump in on some of the tech, but I'll try not to be overwhelming. I just feel like there are so many edges to this conversation that I see every day that I feel like aren't really getting a lot of attention. But yeah, there are a lot. So, I mean, I think in general, it's useful to note that beyond end-to-end encryption, where, if Matt and I are having a conversation, it's just the two of us, there's a lot of encryption that is about users and the service that they're accessing. So this is sort of what we would call like transport encryption. It's the thing that keeps you safe when you're doing your banking online or talking to, a doctor through a portal. There's like a lot of different use cases. In fact, incredibly mundane. Almost every website you visit is going to be protected with this kind of encryption. Now, like this doesn't necessarily pose an issue for law enforcement. So you don't see a lot of policy attacks or other kinds of things against this because the easy thing is just to go to the service, subpoena the company, sort of get the data that you need, and that's relatively easy. Now, it isn't so easy if you're not in the jurisdiction where that service exists, right? So a lot of countries, in the global south and sort of elsewhere that would maybe benefit from having access to this data can't get it because the companies are largely in the US or other places. So one trend we have to sort of be aware of is that the spell on this is kind of being broken in ways because of the cybercrime convention that has been signed at the UN. It's going to make it a lot easier for essentially any jurisdiction on the planet to be able to sort of exfiltrate this kind of data directly from the companies rather than through sort of the more hierarchical requests via governments. So that's like one trend just to keep in mind. And I would say another one, this is kind of exciting for end users, is that there's a push for interoperability in large services. And so, WhatsApp, our friends at WhatsApp are having to, based on European regulation, design interoperability for WhatsApp because it's considered a very large online platform that with gatekeeping powers. So that interoperability will be coming to end-to-end encrypted messaging. It has, like I said, exciting for end users. It's going to have some implications for how security works and how a lot of other, related features work. So like, the messaging platforms will interoperate, but you might also see potentially like intermediary services that can crop up because of this wider interoperability. You might see changes in the ways that, authentication or like your handles, your usernames, like instead of phone numbers, you might be seeing different kinds of ways of contacting people. So some of that stuff might be shifting in the future. There's a little bit of speculation how that will work. But overall, like it should be pretty good. And then I'll just say the one last thing, like we often think of the like law enforcement as our example of, like why folks are trying to disrupt into encryption, but we often don't recognize that network operators, and specifically internet service providers, ISPs, Verizon and so on, they are invested in this as well, because end-to-end encryption, even transport encryption, really shuts them out of data that they might use for, their business model, like every other sort of tech service in the world. So you often see that the policy debates are often very much buoyed and supported by network services, because they also have a sort of, again, like economic reason for wanting to have less encryption on the network. So just to keep that in mind for folks that are sort of trying to follow the ball through this back and forth.
Gotcha.
Can I
Thanks,
follow
Mallory.
up on
Heather?
that, Mallory? Yeah, one thing that has absolutely shocked me, and it takes a lot to shock me in the context of British politics, has been the influence that lobbyists have on the government distaste for encryption. Because as there's been this push for online safety, whether through the Online Safety Act or just as a general means of keeping young people safe online, this has given rise to a massive sector of providers who would just love to be able to solve all the problems by scanning all the content. And what's standing in their way? End-to-end encryption. And I have seen sales pitches from lobbyists where they've actually said, we could stop child abuse, we could stop this, we could stop that, if you just got rid of that pesky end-to-end encryption. I've had discussions with members of parliament where they're saying, oh, we're just going to sort all this. And I'm thinking, where has she got this from? And it turns out a lobbyist has promised her the sun and moon. So when we're talking about toxic business models, and we can all agree here that there's myriad of problems with big tech and their impacts on young people, you don't solve that by doing the exact same thing. So I'd like to be everyone to be very conscious of how a lot of the push against end-to-end encryption is coming from basically private sector lobbyists who want to contribute to solving all these problems we have, but end-to-end encryption is standing in their way.
Heather, I think that's an excellent point. One of the things that I think about when I think about encryption is I think about the concept of control, right? And how end-to-end encryption puts control in my hands for my messages and for my financial transactions and for my photos and for my data, right? And how end-to-end encryption puts others' control in their own hands, right? And sometimes there are governments, companies, other organizations, other individuals, right? Criminals, who would rather they be in control of my data. And I think that metaphor of control and that framing of control is an important framing for the reasons you just discussed. When young people are in control of who they communicate with, how they communicate with them, how they store their data, who they share their data with, and who they choose not to, right? Sometimes that can create really thorny social questions. But ultimately, it's the technology that are putting young people in control of their own data. And I think by and large, our view at FPF is that that's a good thing, right? Like by and large, that's probably a net good for young people and for society and for everybody else. I wonder, right, how parents and educators and others who interact with young folks should think about this, and whether you folks have any thoughts on, for those of us who are young at heart but perhaps not as young in age as we used to be, how should we be thinking about, as parents and educators and policymakers and others, engaging on these issues with young folks?
Well, I'll just say that it's important as educators and parents and others, we all were young people. It's kind of how biology and existence goes, right? And we care about them and we love them. And it's important to explain these things to them, that understanding their right to privacy, autonomy, and agency, understanding their the power that it gives them, but also to be responsible with that power. The key thing is that while there's end-to-end encryption, which protects messages from one device to another, and as well as transport layer encryption, which will protect us when we use commercial services. There's even new technologies like message level encryption, MLS. where we can look at standards for messaging. But that's just the delivery. And once the gift gets the other side and we unwrap it, that's where it is, the message. That's all it is a message, right? And it's important to say, like, if you receive a strange message from a strange person, you know what? Don't worry about that. We got you. This is what we're going to do together. Um, and by having these protections, for example, Jonathan talked about the social graph and how it could be used with encryption to add further layers of encryption for, protection for younger people. Um, and if you receive bullying, right? Like, bullying used to happen maybe on a playground, right? I myself as a nerd and dodging the risk of being shoved in a locker, right? Well, now that bullying follows you to wherever your device is, which might be always in your hand, might be your home or your hallway or your bedroom, and extortion against young people as well. So it's about having these conversations about how encryption actually helps us protect people from these things, protect folks from state overreach, law enforcement overreach, but also to allow like containers of safety. And I think it's just about like parenting has not changed. It's about love and guidance, rearing and protection, and a bunch of other things, right? A lot of laundry, I heard. But parenting in the modern world is also about conversations on privacy, knowing where these tools are, how to turn them on, what our rules are as a family, what our rules are as a classroom, what our rules are as a community, to have these norms based on safety and caring. And I think like those are just like the newer kind of conversations, kind of like, there was a time when parents said, the thing you need to know about this technology called a phone is to memorize your phone number and memorize your family's phone numbers, right? But now the thing is that you need to know about this technology of phone is, you're not going to get one till you're older and it follows you around, right? Everywhere you go, right? Um, there was a time when we were like, oh, I would hate for someone to see my search engine results. But now we're in a world where it's like, forget the search engine. I would hate anyone to see what I'm writing to my AI assistant or my home assistant or whatever. So, the world has changed. Parenting evolves as well. And I think like that's the message is these are things that we don't need to be experts on, like this amazing panel, but we do need to be aware of and not scared of, to Heather's point. There are a lot of different forces at play that will want to, have you think this way or that about anything. But understand that these are things that allow you to keep the child in your life, whether you're uncle, aunt, community member, etc., safer than ever, um, empowered strongly, and actually ready for an amazing new future.
Awesome.
Actually, John, I was when Matt was speaking, there's I have a vis-a-vis parents, I have a little word of caution. The emphasis is on safety, but that was not the word that came to mind that was needed, that I think is needed. And Matt mentioned it right at the end, which is it's not keeping your children safe. It is empowering your children in order that they can keep themselves safe. That means certain degree of honest communication, because children are going to have, whether they're tweens or whether they're teens, they have their own lives, and they want to keep part of that life separate and private from their parents. So parents, I have two boys, and when I grew up, I didn't know everything, but what I wanted them to do was to be able to make decisions for themselves in a good way. And so the message to children is obviously talk to your children, but it's not about keeping themselves safe. It's not about making decisions for them. It is about helping them to be in a position to make the best decisions for themselves.
And if I could just add to that, these comments really resonate around control and empowerment, and it really is at the core of how we think about some of these issues at Meta. And our job, in part, as the people creating these tools, is to try to create them in ways that are as intelligible and usable as possible, so that both young people and parents understand the tools that these services have to empower them, to give them control. So the parents and young people can have the conversations informed by how the tools actually work. And we don't always get it right. We're always looking for ways to make things simpler, easier, more intelligible, easier to use. So advice would be both to those who are using our services to do what you can to make sure you understand how they work. To ourselves, as always, to try to make that as easy and as intelligible as possible so that people really can take control of their experiences online.
I have two great questions from the audience that I would love to integrate into the discussion right now. One is, as an IT, this is from Jason. As an IT professional, I speak with tons of people who are mentally drained and overwhelmed with all the tech talk and all the speed of innovation. What simple advice or suggestions would you give your family and friends who are not tech savvy about encryption and security? Does anybody have a favorite? Matt.
Thanks. Pass me the ball, coach. I got this. Yeah, so something I would say, and that's a great question. And we all know the drain of all this tech stuff. It's sometimes overwhelming. Is that you got this? It doesn't have to be, this really complicated thing. Um, when it comes to encryption, I would say choose the encrypted messenger that's best for you. Um, like Jonathan's here from the world's #1 messaging piece of software in the world, like billions of people have agreed. It's like 9 out of 10 dentists. It's like billions of people have chosen this particular app. I have my own nerdy favorites that are different, but just understand that what's there, go shopping, with the family and pick out what works best for you, whichever encrypted messenger, because that's what we tend to use these things for the most, which is messaging, right? You can send a message anywhere on the planet in a few milliseconds, right? It just gets there. And so I think that is something just, and through that and being versed in that, I say mastery over multitude. So just stick with that one. Then go through the settings and be like, what does that mean? Maybe once a month, open up settings and just look it up, and like read the tutorial on the website, watch the video and be like, oh, fascinating. And I think like that's how you do it. It's just gradual, one step at a time.
I think I agree. It can be overwhelming. And I try to reassure people that they shouldn't have to worry about this stuff. Like, one of the things I started out my work on this many years ago as a digital security trainer, teaching one person at a time. It felt like the in and outs of how to use really complicated versions of what everyone now has on their phones. So trust me when I tell you, it's a total breath of fresh air to know that the technical engineers of the lower layers of the internet have been very invested in making this easy and ubiquitous for everyone. And so we are in a really good place. I think we're at risk. Everybody has this intuition. They would not like strangers listening to their conversations. Everyone has this intuition. They are not super jazzed about targeted behavioral advertising. We need to really enforce that those are the right intuition so that they can continue to send the message to these really big companies that is why they're using these services, that they want that confidentiality and they want to be free from ads. They want their data to be protected from, somebody just put in the chat, but I don't know that everybody can see it, just the hosts and panelists. Somebody asked about AI. This is why a lot of folks want secret messaging or private conversations. And that is in tension with a lot of big providers who would like to have both. They would like to continue to give folks the sort of privacy protections that they've been asking for, given what we know about, and this includes teens, right? Like the keynote speaker herself mentioned that teens want freedom from advertising. They don't want their data to be swept up in these large models. And so we have to make sure that everyday folks are voting with their feet and using services that don't violate that don't try to have both, right? Oh, this is a privacy service, and we're going to try to use a bit of the metadata or a bit of this and that to sort of continue to feed you relevant ads, to continue to test out our latest and greatest AI products. That's, I think, where we need to get big mass discussion with our next door neighbors and our colleagues and our family to make sure that that remains safe and secure.
Others on tips for non-techie young folks or folks who engage with young folks?
I think Matt really nailed it. I mean,
Yeah.
Mallory has great comments as well, of course, but I think Matt's comments about really looking at how your services work, picking the one that's right for you, familiarizing yourself. And again, as I said, as a provider, these services are always looking to make them simpler and more intelligible. We don't always get it right, but that is a great way to approach it.
I think the only thing I would add, John, is for people who want simple answers, unfortunately, encryption isn't necessarily one of those spaces where you can have simple answers, but also beware of the simple explanations. You know, we need to get rid of encryption to fight crime. We need to get rid of encryption to keep our kids safe online. Those are false arguments because it is a complicated topic. And, you know, when somebody speaks to you, whether you hear it, you know, from some politician or some policymaker or some lobbyist, to point out Heather's point, or somebody on the communications front that's trying to sell you that message, the answer isn't simple. It's, I think, important for people to remember that.
Yeah, so Michael, I couldn't agree more. No simple answers here. When I've talked with folks in law enforcement over the years about this, it really highlights the complexity because sometimes, you know, our friends in law enforcement will say, "Hey, you know, end-to-end encryption is undermining my investigation," right? And then you talk to them a week later, and quite forthrightly, they'll say, you know what, if encryption had been better implemented in this case I'm investigating right now, the financial fraud could have been prevented, right? And so you know, smart folks who sit at government agencies and at companies and in civil society and in academia recognize that this is complicated. You know, the answer is not let's undermine strong encryption. It's also not let's assume that all the answers are simple and straightforward, right? So I take the point. That's a very fair point. Um, a question from the Q&A is, how is encryption protected from AI / how is encryption intersecting with AI right now? I don't think we could responsibly conclude this webinar without at least one AI question. That is the talk of these days. So any thoughts as we move into the next, the final 6 minutes of the webinar or so, on the intersection between encryption and AI?
I'll jump in really quickly and drop a link in the chat to a paper we put out recently about this question, because I think it is important to recognize AI is all built on just huge piles of data lying around, right? That's why we have the impressive generative AI tools that have been recently democratized, leading to every panel we're on now is about AI. The issue though with end-to-end encrypted messaging, right, is that you can't get that data, right? And that's a good thing. Obviously, that's why we're all here. We're all very excited about that. It is in tension then with being able to find it's not a source of data, right? You can just fundamentally say, you know, end-to-end encrypted messages should not be a source of data that's used to train AI models. Now, it gets a little bit more it gets a little less stark if you ask the question, should AI features be part of our messaging apps, right? We use our messaging apps increasingly more and more for things. I was saying that, you know, I think it was in a prior conversation, I now feel like my messaging apps are my social media because social media has become such a weird space for a lot of folks in the field that I am getting so many messages a day through those channels. And so it's nice to have pictures and to share links. And it's a little bit more interactive than it used to be, just, you know, messages back and forth. If we put AI features and capabilities into those applications, we are actually faced with some tension between then those features being so fun to use and the way that our data is being used to make those features work. So that's sort of the point of this paper that I'll drop. I think that this is kind of goes back to my prior comment. We need to be very loud and clear with companies that we prioritize our privacy when we're using end-to-end encrypted messaging apps over the fun features that we expect in social media contexts, but that technically and fundamentally are inappropriate for private spaces.
If I could just build on that a little bit too, and I think Mallory drew an important distinction here too, but about AI-enabled features. AI is a technology that can enable new features, new experiences, many of which are really quite extraordinary and that people want to use. Not everybody wants to use them, but some people do. And so just hearkening back to a key theme from this conversation around control, I think that's going to be a really key principle here, because some people will want to use some of these new AI features. They are going to want them to be able to interact with their messaging experiences. But we want to think about that as within our company as we're thinking about how to build these features and also respect privacy and protect encryption, about doing that in a way that puts the user in control. And so that'll be something that we are going to be thinking a lot about and working towards.
I think that is a fantastic place to stop. I want to wish everyone a happy, safer Internet Day. The Internet is only as safe as we make it, and it is a group effort to make it as safe as we can, as open as we can, as free as we can. And I want to thank our experts. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Mallory. Thank you, Michael. Thank you to the commissioner. Thank you to Peter Leonard for his opening remarks. Many thanks to Amy Stepanovich, Jameson Spivak, and the entire FPF team. Thank you for joining us here today, and more soon on the strong encryption debates, and more information soon from FPF on how strong encryption supports a whole lot of folks' safety online, including teens and kids. Thanks all.
Thank you, John.